So this is the second part of our walkthrough for our Year 10 Computer Science exam. So this is looking at the next question, which is question 3B. So you needed to give a logical statement that was actually writing that Boolean expression, and we're given information about A, B and C. What a few people wanted to do was actually create sentences, and it wasn't asking for that. It was asking for that Boolean statement, logic statement. So we've got A, and it says that A has to be there, so it's going to either be on or off. So we have to have A. It says that then we have got a temperature sensor B. And we have got our C. So basically, it says C has to be on regardless as to whether the other two are on. Okay, so that is our OR. And we need A and B. So we need the power on or off, and we need the heater. So that's our different gates. You could have put brackets around it if you wanted to. You could have even written it the other way. Or you could have broken it down and said you want those two, or those two. So you needed to write a Boolean statement for this question. For our next question, this was asking you about arithmetic shifts, something that we've not covered in lesson, and you were asked to have a little look at it as part of your revision homework, and we will look at that in an upcoming lesson. If at any time this goes too fast, you can always pause the video and go back. In terms of our protocols, sending email messages, we know that that's an email protocol, and we know that they're email protocols. We know it's definitely not file transfer, okay, because that's not an email protocol. In terms of sending, we know it has to be that one, because POP3 and IMAP are about receiving emails. Although IMAP can go in both directions, the way to remember this, even though SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, Simple Mail, think S sending. S is about sending. And then in terms of describe the role of the Ethernet protocol, so that's in our physical layer. Trying to underline that there. That's our physical layer. It's a protocol for communications in our physical layer. What is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Most people got that the S stood for secure. And for the second mark, you needed to explain that it actually works with the secure socket layer. Okay, but it is a secure variant of HTTP. For our TCP IP5 layer model, you just got to describe those layers. So our physical layer, you could have talked about the physical layer transmitting the raw data, having hardware such as routers or the cables, the Ethernet, and it's establishing a link between the computers that are going to communicate. So our physical layer, using our wires, our cables, our hardware to send the raw data. Transport layer, that's all about our packet switching, where our transmission control protocol is. It's about transferring data from one point to another. That's what our packet switching is all about, going from point A to point B without any errors. Making sure that our data is sent in the right order, that no packets are missing. They get all the packets. It might send them down different paths. And lastly, our application layer, our apps. That's things like file transfer protocols. Our HTTP and HTTPS are in there as part of the web browser apps. World Wide Web, that has protocols, www protocols, the World Wide Web. Email protocols, they're all part of the application layer. So SMTP, IMAP, POP3 are all email protocols in the application layer. And you got 2 marks for each layer. Okay, so this was a recent homework that was given where you had to look at the different types of programming errors. So a runtime error, the program has been run. So if I'm in Repel and I'm coding my Python, when I'm ready to press run, the program's running, that's when I can get an error. It's difficult to foresee what's going to happen before it's compiled and run. It can crash. Runtime errors can crash because it's requesting more memory when memory isn't available. So that's why it can sometimes crash. A linking error, we've not really talked about this, but I was sort of hoping you could make that link. This is when, if you have a math library in Python and you want to use a square root function, if you've not linked those two together, it's not going to work. So about linking functions, libraries to code. And rounding, you should know this from maths. A rounding error, if it's rounded, if it's 34.5, it should be rounded up to the nearest whole number. So a rounding error, has it been rounded to the right number? Has it been rounded up, or does it need to be rounded down? So again, you got 2 marks for each error, with a description and an example. So, in types of high-level language versus our low-level language, this is where we're looking at the fact that high level, it's closer to English, it's easier for us to understand than low level language or assembly language. Obviously the lowest is our binary. It's hard to program, we don't all understand it. With assembly language, you've got all those mnemonics, those short 3-letter codes. So high level is closer to English, we can understand it. Because of that, there could be fewer errors, and it can have more complex commands. If you think in Little Man Computer, with assembly language, it can add, it can sub for subtract, but it can't multiply. It has to have repeated addition to make it multiply. So in terms of high level, we don't need to worry about that. We can have much more complex language. You can develop code easier. You can maintain code because you can comment on it, explain your code. And high level works across lots of different platforms. So the key thing, it's closer to English. It's easier for us to understand than low level. And it can be more complex. So you get 1 mark for each of your points. Okay, this question was asking you about what's the difference between an interpreter and a compiler. So if we've got our high level language, the computer doesn't understand that. The computer works in binary. So it needs an interpreter, some kind of translation to translate it, take it from high level into low level. You actually didn't really need to worry about this example code here. You just literally need to explain the difference between interpreting and compiling the code. So you know that when we interpret a code, it's going to look through it. Sorry, our interpreter looks through it line by line. So the interpreter would work through line 1, line 2, line 3, translating it. Whereas a compiler does it all in one go. Takes that code and makes it into low level language all in one go. So it's often hard to spot errors because it's not looking through it line by line. These are some of the other benefits and drawbacks. So the fact that an interpreter is slower than a compiler. Compilers are quick, but because interpreters are going through it line by line, they're slower. However, because it's doing it line by line, it can report those errors and point out exactly which line the error is on as it continues through the code. Whereas a compiler runs the entire program and gives you an error report at the end. So that question was just asking you what is the difference between compilers and interpreters. I couldn't accept if you had done the reverse. So if you'd said interpreters are slower than compilers and then compilers are faster than interpreters, that one person did. Okay, you're now going to need to go to the third and final video of this walkthrough.